Welcome to Heart Over Ego Radio, a collection of podcasts designed to enhance your spiritual journey. Join us on Mondays with the Alchemy Sisters and Creating Heaven on Earth. Tuesdays, Star Medicine Podcast and KT Talk Show. Wednesdays, Political Star Talk. Thursdays, the Optimistic Wellness Podcast. Fridays, Turn Yourself In, Self-Mastery for the Intuitive Sensitive Empath. And The Witching Hour, as well as Horror Magic, a show designed to heal stigma around sexuality. Saturdays, Seen and Heard, a podcast about abuse. And Shining the Light on Sex Trafficking. And Sundays, Gather Round for One for All Is Love with Sonia Spirit. We are Heart Over Ego Radio. Find us on any podcast app, Facebook and Instagram. Search Heart Over Ego Radio.
Hello and welcome to Creating Heaven on Earth. This is a discussion about grounding our collective vision of heaven to earth, and what the difference is between the 5D and the 3D, and what we as individuals can do to assist ourselves and the collection in this ascension. We invite you today to join myself and Holly Joy McCabe for a beautiful, heartfelt conversation about upgrading our vessels and the concept of New Earth. Hey, Holly, how are you today?
I am good. How are you?
I am doing well. I'm so excited to hold some space with you today and jam.
I am thrilled to be here. I can't wait to see how this just unfolds.
Well, as our listeners know, we tend to let spirit just lead on this show, and we talk about whatever feels most in alignment. We're all trying to navigate what this whole New Earth concept is, what the difference is between the dimensions. And with everything happening in our world right now, we're all getting a lot of practice at that. So I'm super excited to hear your perspectives.
Awesome.
So how are you feeling? There's a lot going on right now in the world. You actually, if you would take just a second and introduce yourself to our listeners and just let them know a little bit about who you are and your magic that you share in the world right now. And then we'll get into how you're feeling about things.
Yeah, so I'm Holly Joy McCabe. I go by Spiritual Fit Chick in a lot of my platforms. That's kind of my personal brand. And originally I kind of started with this concept of bridging mind, body, soul, fitness together, strengthening and cultivating resiliency through movement and mindset and trauma healing and all these different elements. And outside of that, I really love taking people through the hard times in life. Again, we kind of get so beat up by trauma and circumstance, and 2020 has been a perfect example of that. And we tend to sort of lose sight and connectedness with our inner strength. So that, I would say, out of all the things that I do, is one of my favorite things to do, is really just tap people back into their inner resiliency and strength and help them kind of get grounded. And that kind of answers your other question too, with sort of how I'm feeling. I know that 2020 has been a crazy ride for a lot of people, and there's so much uncertainty and change and just collective, oh my gosh, overwhelm. But I've very surprisingly and thankfully been able to maintain an incredibly grounded, centered kind of space for myself through this. I feel like I've kind of reached a new level of that. I think we're always going through levels of that, and then we get new challenges and we have to go to the next level. And I don't know, sometimes I felt just knocked on my ass with things, but for some reason, whatever it is, maybe I was preparing for this with the couple really rough years I had prior, but 2020, I feel like I've tapped into my inner strength and my inner leadership, bigger than ever. So that's kind of answering both questions in one.
I think it's perfect and beautiful, and I appreciate you so much. I've been sensing kind of that stepping into my power as well and feeling really grounded. I think it's been really fascinating, though, there's all these confines and there are negative social implications to social distancing. One of the positives out of it is a lot of people have had an opportunity to be in their own biomagnetic fields for the first time in so long and tune in to what it is their heart wants most, or how their vessel feels and what is good for their body or bad for their body. Some people are really liking working from home. Some Some people are really enjoying having a different type of lifestyle or work schedule or eating more intuitively. And for me, this has like been something I feel like my life has been preparing me for as well. But at the same time, it's allowed me to go in even deeper as well. And I'm enjoying kind of, though there's chaos, there's also some stillness rising as well.
Yeah, you literally just summed it up so beautifully. And I think that was a big part for me, what brought me to that like strength. A couple years ago, I closed a business that I had for 8 years. I moved to a new city, I got married, and I basically kind of like started all over. I felt very raw in the world and like vulnerable, and just like I was trying to start these new things in my life, but I didn't really feel like the direction and the path was clear. And I spent a lot of time like actually spending energy in places that didn't need my energy, basically, like going to networking events and trying to show up for people and just basically kind of spinning my wheels and staying scattered. And 2020 was the ultimate, like, connect to yourself. Like, you don't need this person to like you or to, you know, buy your products or whatever. I just focused on me first, like what my heart was really drawing me to do. But then right after that, once I tuned into that, I was like, I'm here to serve the people that I'm meant to serve in the biggest way. And I hadn't really realized, I thought I was showing up for those people, but when you water yourself down, you can't really lead in full like truth and authenticity and power. When you're trying to appease 50 different styles of people and personalities, you're not going to really lead the one that you're meant to in the most powerful way. And I think 2020 was just that beautiful gift of all the things that didn't really matter that I was spending energy on finally got cut away. And I was like, oh, there I am. I'm like, okay, cool, we got this. And I just felt like I've been on like this rocket ship of upward development and growth personally and professionally ever since then. So sometimes our greatest gift can just be like all other outlets, the door just closing. And that's what I feel like happened.
Oh, it's so beautiful. And I honor you so much because you really have stepped into your power more and more. I've been lucky enough to know you for several years now, and it's been really nice to watch what a beacon of light you've been for people, especially through the election. It's up to you. We can talk about it if you want. This is an open conversation with all the languages and opinions that you would want to bring. But you've really been able to step up and help lead a different population of people and help them to look outside the box. And people are so grateful for you, and I'm one of them. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of people have this mindset, and I was one of them for honestly a really long time until this year. Again, it pushed us to whole new like depths of ourselves that thought like politics was just something you didn't talk about, you know, politics and religion, like those two things are the things you never talk about. And being in the spiritual space or the new age space or, you know, all the different titles, there tends to be this just like ostracization of like, no, we don't talk about that. But what I realized is just like sexuality and money, like politics is one of the most repressed kind of distorted realms of people that they don't feel like they can stand in their truth with. They don't feel like they're really strong in their opinions. Maybe they believe a certain way because their husband or their parents kind of just passed that down, but maybe they have more liberal beliefs, but their family is conservative or whatever. And so the deeper I kind of went into it on my own journey, and then of course it being an election year, I was like, wow, like nobody's really speaking about the middle road. Like this is just one more area where we have this black and white, cut and dry, it's this or that, and there's no room for individual human experience. There's no room for fluidity in your beliefs or, you know, just this flexibility of, well, I identify with some of these values and they're kind of left, and I identify with some of these values and they're kind of right. And I'm like, dude, this is just what we've been doing in all these other areas, and it's just like suppressing human evolution. So like, I've got to speak about this on politics. Like we can't just take this huge element that encompasses so much of our daily life and our existence and just like pretend it doesn't exist and pretend that we're not allowed to talk about it or that we shouldn't talk about it. And I know I've lost a lot of people, like a lot of people, people can only meet you through, you know, where they're at. They can only see you through their lens that they have. What that demonstrated to me was how powerful those lenses are, and that a part of my work is to help people kind of dismantle those lenses. When we see something through a political lens, which, you know, in health, fitness, sexuality, again, all these different topics, we are inundated with messaging and narratives, whether that's a religious narrative or a family narrative. Like, we create these beliefs of repetition, and only surrounding ourselves with a certain narrative, right? Well, like with politics, that's on steroids, because we tend to follow the same news stations, or again, we naturally have people who share the same beliefs with us. And so those beliefs get so deep rooted in us that, like, most people aren't really going to go to war if you challenge their dietary beliefs, right? They're not going to hit up the streets and do the things that have happened in the last 8 months, basically, over that. But political divide is one of the most charged and most powerful divides that I think exists. I mean, there's not really, I mean, yes, they do in religion to an extent, but not really in America. But in America, it is the war of the left versus the right. It is do or die. It is like fight to the death. And when you're on the left or the right and you see anything that doesn't match your view perfectly, it's an attack, it's a threat. It's like, we're never going to move forward if we don't start to learn that, again, people are allowed to be their own individual thing. They're allowed to have their own opinions, and that we don't have to attack, destroy, cancel all the different elements of someone just because it doesn't align with exactly how we think. And I think that that is one of our biggest spiritual lessons that has come up. I think is one of the biggest things we need to work on healing. And I think it's one of the biggest battles that we face kind of ahead of us, is dismantling this pre-programmed belief of, if you're this, you're bad. If you're this, you're bad. And, just going to war with each other. Like, that's kind of my summary of the whole election process and what this year has brought up.
Oh, and it's beautiful. And thank you so much for sharing that, because it resonates as so true with me. And I agree that this is one of our biggest spiritual lessons. And for me, it's about this whole entire healing process, if you will, if we want to call it that, or ascension. It really starts on an individual level, and then it goes back out. It's this inner revolution that turns into a collective evolution. And if you start to choose your actions and your reactions to things and tune into what's going on with your vessel, like if you go and you look at a symbol of just a Trump flag or just a Biden flag, and you have a visceral reaction to that, for me, triggers are opportunities to heal, whether it's physical, spiritual, emotional. They're there to say, hey, there's a bit of an imbalance here. But we ultimately get to choose what energies we choose to hold within our vessels about either past experiences or current experiences happening. And so many people are getting an opportunity to grow and to mature and to start choosing their actions and reactions a little differently. Because if you take a step back and you're like, okay, yeah, there's a crazy political thing going on right now. We've been, programmed to believe one way or another way our entire lives. But if I just take a step back and take a breath and say, okay, why is this making me feel this way? And is this because, like you so beautifully said, Holly, because I'm defending, a perception that got passed down or a belief from my family? Or am I protecting this because I do really believe something's wrong? Like, I think just as much as we need to control our actions and our reactions, there is such a thing as sacred rage. If you're walking down the road and someone kicks a dog, for me, that's going to upset me and trigger me, and I'm going to want to say something about it or help in some way. But my choice is to then respond to that energy right in that moment and handle it, and then detach after the battle, after the situation, and not let it go over and over and over in my heart and mind and space and vessel. And this is something you're an absolute expert on, is the damage that these energies can create within our vessels. That's what I worry about the most, and that's where I also see the most hope for us healing as a collective, when we start taking responsibility for our individual energies.
Yeah, absolutely. And it brings up a good point that I, wanted to expand on next, which is the thing that is exploited in the political divide, I think deeper than in any other divide, is that everyone thinks that what they're doing is the ultimate virtue. Like, they have the ultimate moral high ground. Now, almost anybody could agree that if you see someone beating a dog, that's going to be wrong. It's going to trigger a reaction. It's going to be like, okay, we have to, defend the helpless and step up and be proactive. But you can also take that and go a little bit further to the fact that there are literally other countries that have rituals around animal sacrifice and different things. So it's not that we have to accept everything. It's not that we have to stand down from what we believe is right. It's that we can't really look at things from a bigger perspective if we're not willing to understand that the polarity of each individual person is what you have to be willing to look at and embrace. Otherwise, you're just always, you think that your vision is the ultimate vision and that's it, and nothing else matters. Well, we are individuals and we will always be at war with each other if we constantly look at every single thing as that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong, instead of allowing certain human experiences. Now, with the dog example, again, my personal belief is that animal cruelty and violence for humans or animals is something that should continuously, we should be working on as a collective. But I have to be really mindful of my response to other people who don't see things through the exact lens that I see things through. I have to make sure that I'm not adding into the violence and hatred cup collectively by my reactions. And I think that that's how it can really be summed up. Like, I made a tweet a couple months ago, and it was, humans have this belief that like their version of hate is justified. And everybody thinks that. Everybody thinks that their version of hate is justified and that it's warranted and that it's going to facilitate change. And you've seen that, right? Like, bigger than I think we've ever seen it with the protests and the rioting and everything this year, is people became very, very destructive because they had this unbridled anger and this sense of injustice, and they felt that it was okay to go out and destroy other people and communities and businesses and all of these things because they were like, it's justified, it's justified. Well, we can just keep doing that over and over and over again, and the collective cycle, the snowball of violence and hatred is going to keep growing if some of us don't step up and be like, wait a minute, we have to stop contributing to this. We can want to change this without contributing to the very monster that we claim to be against. And I think that that's where the option of choice, like really stepping back and being like, there's different ways to respond to this that are proactive, and there's ways to respond to this that are destructive. And most people aren't stopping and asking themselves like that question, which is productive, which is like harmful. Their emotions are being manipulated. Again, politically, it's engineered that way of emotions. Emotions will always override logical thinking and rationale and proactivity. We have to take a hold of, like you said, our energy and our own bodies and think. Like, we truly have to think, okay, here's the issue. Here's what I don't agree with. How can I actually be a change? What the media and this current climate is facilitating is just get mad and just go rogue. Like, spew your emotions, like just all over the place, no matter who it harms, you're justified. Like, it's literally creating engineered chaos within us. And I think that is kind of what us, like, spiritual teachers, leaders, coaches, all of that have been sort of gearing up for, is that like, we have to hold the space. Like, we have to be basically what we want to see right now. It goes back to that, old tried and true quote of be the change you wish to see in the world. Well, if I want to see a world of peace and unity and inclusion and justice, then I can't go out and say that everyone who has a political belief that's different than me is, insert all these adjectives and titles and everything and block them off my Facebook and tell them I don't want to be friends with them anymore. Like, I cannot claim that I want that if I'm not willing to be that. And I think a lot of people claim they want a lot of things that they aren't willing to actually be themselves. And again, that is the challenge we're up against. We're up against looking at things differently. We're up against understanding neutrality doesn't mean indifference necessarily. It means you're willing to think more intentionally instead of just reacting. Because a lot of people, again, they think that what they're fighting for is the ultimate truth and the ultimate moral high ground. And if you're not fighting the same fight that they're fighting, then you're complicit with whatever they believe to be damaging. We all have different opinions of what that is. Whether we want to admit it or not, that is the truth. Again, every culture, every religion, every country has a different ideology of what is right and wrong. Does it mean that 5 people on the whole planet are worth, listening to or existing on this realm? I don't necessarily think so. I think we just have to continuously try to find ways to merge what we believe, but be open, and also just really root into that proactivity. And I keep using that word because I think that of the millions of people that took to the streets and burnt cities and rioted and did different things for a just cause, if they had taken that energy and actually truly went and invested in underprivileged communities or in different charity organizations or started an actual fundraiser for something, there's so many ways that energy could have been collectively distributed in more positive ways that would really truly have positive impacts. But because it was so unbridled and so distorted, it just caused destruction. Like nothing positive happened from any of that, you know? Nothing positive has happened really from all of the, I'm going to unfriend you if you voted for such and such, just unfriend me now, you know, that brought us the opposite of unity. And people just keep doing it. So
absolutely.
Yeah, we have to be willing to check ourselves, basically.
Check yourself before you wreck yourself. Well, it's true. And it's been so interesting because I'm someone who's been pretty objective throughout this whole thing, and I listen to all the different groups. And if I so much as share something on Facebook that has the Trump administration's name in it, it could be related to sex trafficking or finances or whatever, then I'll get like ostracized. And I've lost a lot of clients and different, you know, situations and experiences and respect from other people who used to respect me more. And for me, I'm okay with that because I know where I'm coming from, and I'm coming from a really balanced place when I look at all these things. And I do believe that we have to look into the middle here to find the common ground in order to start to advance. My kind of definition between the 3D and the 5D is when you operate from 3D, you have very limited perspectives. When you operate from a 5D, you have an unattached perspective. You're able to stay in a space of unattachment and just observe what's going on around you. And then you're also able to think way outside the box in a very unlimited perspective. And that's like the biggest difference that I've started to notice between the 3D and the 5D is very much our perceptions and how we start to control, you know, energies. Now, I feel for the people because we have been programmed for so long to create divisiveness between us and to separate or have one side is right and one side is wrong. And then with the riots and whatnot, we saw all these people finally have a chance or permission, if you will, to go out and use their rage that they haven't healed yet. And it might be because of what's going on politically, but it might just be a lot of other, you know, held or stuck traumas or dramas that have been repressed that are coming out because they finally feel like, oh, well, this is the time. I'll just go beat in, you know, some glass doors or something like that, and I'll get this energy out. Now, if we created a space where we didn't have to use only these times to express those energies, like it would be such a different world. But we're all navigating that together, and so many people have just, you know, are innocent victims of this manipulation as well. So that's why I keep trying to just encourage people to tune back in with their heart and what it is that's true for them.
Yeah, 100%. And kind of going into, you know, I've obviously been the same. Like, I've been super objective and middle road, but 90% of the people that have followed me have seen it through one lens because the media has told them if someone is Republican or red or, you know, anything even remotely near that side, that they're a racist, that they're all these different things, and you're not allowed to even look at anything on the other side. Well, again, where has that existed? It's existed in sexuality. It's existed in women's right to vote. Like, we've conquered all these things and we felt empowered and like we were fighting the good fight, but then we just kind of like stopped with politics. Like, we've tried to take control of our own bodies and, you know, develop all these rights and everything, but yet we've literally just handed over our minds to media narratives. Like, we've never bothered to say, wait a minute, is that actually true? And like, to me, that's the ultimate test of like, are we going to take ownership of our own life and help advance the collective forward by being willing to take 100% responsibility for basically looking into things. Like, again, people they kind of like the spoon-fed, just tell me what to think. Just tell me what to believe and tell me what to think. I don't want to have to look at both sides. I don't want to have to look at research. Just tell me. Well, guess what? Facebook and Twitter and Instagram just stepped up to the plate for that. And that should concern people. The fact that all this censorship has been happening this year, the fact that thousands of channels and accounts have been deleted that advocated for alternative and, natural health, the fact that people have been ostracized and condemned and lost licenses and channels and their lifetimes of work, websites have been shut down. That should concern people. The ability to express, and our right to free speech and our right to information as humans is being taken away from us. And we're just sitting here saying, oh, yeah, you just do it. People are literally not only complicit in allowing it to happen, but they're literally asking for it. People are asking to have the burden of thinking taken away from them. And that's a really, really scary thing for me. So for me, when I started speaking up, it wasn't for pro-Trump or pro-Biden or anything else. It was stop letting the media manipulate you. Stop letting these biased sources that are bought and paid for influence your political decision and where you put your vote. Stop letting family and people you follow, especially celebrities, tell you that if you don't vote for this person that you're XYZ, a horrible person. And it's happened with, the whole COVID thing. If you don't believe a certain way, or if you're not terrified and living in fear, then, you're a conspiracy theorist. There's all of these different ways that the media has perpetuated this fear and this panic and this chaos and attack the person who doesn't think like you. Because the media, it's not attacking people. It's just planting seeds and letting people attack each other. That is literally mind control. Like, that is manipulation at its simplest, level. And if we're not willing to step up and fight for our own minds, we are doomed. And that is the sense of urgency that I think 2020 has brought to me. I started speaking up about things that I had never thought, I would publicly speak on. Again, I made a lot of people mad. Every single day, my friends list drops down 5 and I add 5 new people. And then the next day it drops down 5 and I'm like, I'm just here for it. I'm so worrying about trying to appease everybody. I believe we have an obligation to finally stop saying that we're just going to believe the first thing that we hear and we're going to go deeper, that we're going to take that responsibility on and actually look for the truth. And when you do that, and you've been on that journey, like I know you and I both have in many different areas, and you see the truth, the hardcore factual evidence of the truth, and you realize how much you've been lied to, you're like, dang, more people need to be doing this. And that's why we teach and speak what we do, of hey, just maintain an open mind. Maintain an open mind. That's my biggest message. You can see me through whatever lens, but the thing I am constantly holding up to people is look at both sides, dig deeper, evaluate, study, research, let go of your bias and move forward. And kind of circling back to, the anger, like you said, people going out, and it's probably lifetimes of trauma and wounds and frustration. Nobody processes these things. It's not like we learn trauma healing tools and mindfulness in high school. Mm-hmm. One of the biggest reasons that I have been adamantly against everything that's happened with all the rioting and the violence is we can't say that we're mad about someone dying and then say that the 7 people that died in the process of being mad about the one person dying was okay. It's asinine. I mean, you got to be willing to look at just the hypocrisy of that in and of itself. But then we also have to look further than that, which is people react inappropriately and harmfully to others when they have unhealed trauma, like an officer who doesn't respond appropriately, or like a husband who doesn't know how to deal with his emotions, so he beats his wife. Violence and abuse always comes from an unregulated mind, soul, and body, right? Well, what have we done in 2020 except for go and transfer an epic boatload of trauma to other people? And the very people that should be healing trauma the most are police officers, people who are trying to actually do the right thing. We just went out and literally traumatized them. I mean, officers have been assaulted and murdered and shot sitting in their cars and beaten. That doesn't help the collective move forward with officers who know how to respond more appropriately, right? So it's just this transfer of trauma where I have unhealed trauma, so I'm going to go out and brutally assault somebody because I'm mad about it, because the media told me to be, and then that person is going to be 10 times more traumatized, and we just have this amplification of trauma and reactivity and nervous systems that are on high alert, and that is not a good thing. That is not going to help anybody. It's not going to save any lives moving forward or bring any kind of justice or peace or unity. And that has been the number one thing that has made the whole riot a hard stop for me. I'm like, no matter what, I can't get behind going out and creating that kind of trauma for everybody else involved. Like that, it's not a good thing, no matter how justified you think it is. And of course, everyone looks at that through a lens of me being a lot of different things, because that's all they can see. The media told them to think that. If you're against the riots, then you're just all the bad labels, and you know which ones I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm. Preach, sister. I feel you. And I'm so vibing with everything you're talking about, because I feel for the people, because we've been so desensitized and we don't realize just how desensitized we have been by the media. And we've been raised in this super instant gratification society that if things don't really go our way, or if we have to sit in uncomfortable feelings, we don't know how to heal or transmute them, and really mental health over the past probably 30 years, 20 years has been more open to women, and men are just starting to be, embraced in the mental health world and starting to talk about these traumas and dramas. But they're a big deal, and they get stored at a cellular level. And just like Holly was talking about, if we repress them, then we're going to bring them up in different ways where they don't belong, or it's not a place where, I guess it's up to every individual's perspective, but I don't feel are the most appropriate channels to release them. And they end up creating intentional harm. And then we mess up the whole calibration of the energy that we're trying to bring in on the planet. And so right now, more than ever, it is so important to stand in our peace and in our sovereignty and show up as a different type of energy than what we're seeing happen out there. I host another show. If you're just tuning in, this is Heart Over Ego Radio. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, any major podcast app. Just search Heart Over Ego Radio. We have many, many shows to help you along your spiritual ascension. And one of those shows that I participate in is called Seen and Heard, a podcast about abuse. And we were talking about an episode of just these two young boys who murdered, well, actually she lived. They attempted to murder a little girl. They were like 13-year-old boys, and one, I think she was like 12 or 13-year-old girl, and they were like classmates and friends, and they were Snapchatting each other, and the girl like wanted to buy a knife from them or something like that, and went to like meet up with them because they played I think they played a video game together or something, but they also went to school. So she went to just meet up with them like in the neighborhood, and they ended up shooting her as she walked away, and they had planned it, and they had no excuse for this. Like when they went to trial and they ended up sentencing the boys and whatever happened, they literally just said, like, I didn't want her Snapchatting me anymore. Like, I was annoyed, so I just wanted her to be done. And for me, looking at that situation, I'm like, man, this is like what we're seeing in these kids who have just been so desensitized and so conditioned to do everything digitally, or to just get rid of her avatar, is what my friend Vanessa said. It's like she was an avatar to them that they just like went to go get rid of. And so as you were talking about all the thinking and the autopilot and the stuff that's coming in, the way people are programmed, I really have some fear around that too, and the way we're seeing it show up in abuse in the modern day right now.
Yeah, like, first of all, that story's just, it's hard to even comprehend somebody that age and just, no motive, no anything, but, transfer of trauma. That's why it is such a passionate subject of mine, because everything that we don't transmute and heal, we transfer. It always happens that way. Trauma is like just the thing that just keeps on giving and giving and giving, and it can go through lifetimes. And a mother's trauma can literally impact a developing embryo inside. Like, there's all these different ways that these traumas show up, and then we have just this sense of brokenness. Even though I don't ever really believe a human's truly broken, but in theory we have just this collective trauma that is so heavy, and all of these just really tough things that we're dealing with. And then you have this extreme desensitization, like you mentioned. We have violence and all of these different like dynamics in entertainment. And, years ago, I think when like rap music was really popular, like there's this whole thing of like rap music doesn't make people violent, yada, 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 and video games don't make people violent. And there's always kind of been this like, I guess, accusation that only these super extreme religious people were dumb enough to believe that a video game could have any impact on a kid. And the reality is, for the most part, no, a violent video game doesn't make someone just go straight out and shoot somebody. But when we look collectively at this desensitization that's happening, there's some great films that came out this year that really talked about it. I mean, people that were experts in their industry and psychology and neuroscience, this stuff is really starting to come out that these things shape the brain. They shape the brain. They impact the brain. They desensitize us from things that we don't think should be a big deal, or that they aren't a big deal when they should be, because we've seen it so many times. Well, before the digital era, when we would see violence, it would create a response, like you mentioned earlier with the dog. If you saw something in real life like that, it would do that. Well, if you played a game all day for 15 years of your life as you were developing that had you beating a dog in the head with a hammer, that might not have the same visceral response from you when you drive by. That's the reality of it. Our brains they're imprinted, they're impacted, they're shaped with every single visualization is one of the most powerful ways to positively create change in your life, to sit down and go through visuals and feel the emotions. Well, we're literally doing that with video games and movies that make us feel a certain way. You know, when our heart rate goes up and we feel tension or suspense in a movie, like that's a physiological response that we're having from something that we see. When we want to cry and the lump, pops up in our throat because it's sad, like when we really stop and think about it, we understand that these things have an impact on us. We just don't think it lasts past the time that we're actually engaging in the activity or watching the movie. But it does, especially when you spend, again, a whole lifetime watching these things and being exposed to these things. And now the things that kids can get access to, from like extreme violent porn to there's literally sites where people can go and watch other people get murdered and like these horrific things. Like, again, we have to be willing to look at that and stop putting our head in the sand and being like, oh, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. If none of it mattered, then we wouldn't be in the collective state that we are right now. We wouldn't have so much pain and violence and trauma recirculating in abusive men and, violence and murder and all of these things. These are the heavier things that we have to be willing to look at and stop pretending that people are just born into this world and that they're either going to be a murderer or they're not, that nothing else has anything to do with it. And again, it goes back to that people don't want to think. Well, they not only don't want to think, they don't want to have to question their own behaviors, and they certainly don't want to have to change their behaviors. And I talked about this a lot in 2020, specifically because I started voicing my passion for human trafficking, which was ironic timing since it finally came to the forefront of, just mainstream attention for the first time ever. And,
yeah.
And everybody wants to be like, oh, human trafficking is this, really extreme, horrible thing that women and children are bought and sold and sexually exploited over and over and over again. Like, how horrific is that? They can't even comprehend it. It's like, and they just can't even wrap their mind around it. But yet, they watch shows like Game of Thrones that I have not personally watched. I refuse to watch virtually anything kind of mainstream TV that's centered around like rape culture and violence and abuse, and they use that as entertainment. And they don't even ever think about the fact that there's a tiny connection there. I'm not saying if you watch that you're a predator or anything like that. I'm saying we like to indulge in what we like to indulge in, and we don't want to ever have it questioned that maybe it's a tiny bit connected to the thing that we find abhorrent, the thing that we just can't even look at. Porn obviously is a much more, closer connection, and it does directly fuel the trafficking industry. Well, there's billions upon billions of porn users every single second. Nobody wants to have their favorite pastime or their habits, looked at and have any kind of connection of, oh, this could actually be fueling this. The rate that, porn has turned very violent and just kind of dark has increased over and over and over again. It's a huge addiction. It's taking over men's minds and bodies. It's creating devastating effects on relationships, and it's been proven to directly fuel the human trafficking industry. They actually want to talk about that. They don't want to talk about what they're streaming into their own homes and their own devices. It's kind of like behind closed doors, out of sight, out of mind. And that's, again, what I think we are being challenged to do, is be challenged to look at what are we allowing in our lives because it's fun and it feels good and it's entertaining and we don't think it's a big deal, that is actually a part of the bigger picture. Not the picture by itself, but a tiny little part. I think that's what we're being called to do by all of these big, deep shadows kind of coming to the surface. It's like, okay, well, we can criticize and condemn and judge all we want, the most extreme versions of it, but what we shouldn't be doing is claiming that that's the only version of it that needs to be addressed. We have to be willing to look at ourselves, and that's what most people don't want to do.
And that's just it. That's why this whole, evolution is going to happen with our inner revolutions, because we have to take a look at ourselves on a micro level in order for it to ricochet out on a macro level. And it's so hard, just as like we were just discussing, how desensitized we've become. And you really are. You're calling people out on that, because if you can sit there and watch, these types of episodes of shows or listen to these stories, but then not want to look at what's actually going on in our society, it's insane. I just feel really grateful that I was never touched by the sex trafficking industry in my personal life. But as I started to grow, like just weird things would happen. And I was a bartender for a long time, and I'd start hearing stories from people who would open up to me there. And then I worked with the homeless for a long time, and I would start hearing stories of people who opened up to me there. And then I would also hear it now in my work as more of a spiritual teacher, because this is a safe place where people want to come and talk often, because if they share their story within this, that's the other thing. We have a very broken system, and a lot of people are afraid to confide in a therapist or a place where they might have notes taken about what they went through, or if they're still scared. And as I came to learn more and more of these stories, I learned that a lot of this is just going on right under our noses, often in very suburban neighborhoods with kids who are actually in school and still show up at soccer practice, but, their parents are selling them on weekends or late at night, and it's like the cul-de-sac at the end of the street. And it's insane how much people have no idea what this actually consists of and what they are actually contributing to. And I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Yeah, yep. It's always the big dark monster out there, and it's like, no, it's in your own backyard. It's in, again, there's all of these different ties of webbing that connects all of this, and we can't claim that we want to see change if we're not willing to make the tiny change. And I think people like to sort of, it's kind of the crux of like our human mind. It tends to go to this whole like, oh, well, that doesn't really make a difference. That's not a big deal. Like sort of recycling, like one person buying plastic water bottles isn't a big deal. Like it's our default to kind of give ourselves an out and we do that by saying it's like not really going to make a difference. Again, well, the porn we watch, like, no, it's not like that. So it's not a big deal. And we refuse to look at the interconnectedness of it all. And we talk ourselves into, it doesn't matter. It's not going to make a big enough difference. It's not going to magically transform the world. But again, we can't expect the world to change when the world is just a billion little units of individuals. Like we just have to be willing to do that. And I do think that the ripple effect is bigger than we consciously see or immediately see. Because again, we're sort of standing in our truth and our self-responsibility in a way that does impact others to do the same. Again, when I started speaking out about porn, and there's a website called Fight the New Drug, and it lists a lot of the science behind how this is impacting people and everything. Like, I thought that I would actually trigger a lot of men to respond. I don't even think the men had the nerve to do it directly. They probably were a lot of the people that were unfriending me, but women were. A lot of women had these kind of responses that surprised me, and I have a lot of different opinions of why that was, but it's like when we have things that are painful in our lives or have caused us damage, we also try to deny the fact that they're harmful, and I think a lot of women have dealt with the pain of porn in their relationships and having partners in their life who are addicted to porn and don't want anything to do with them. And so they've had to go by that whole, oh, it's normal, it's great, it's fine, it's sexual liberation. And they've tried to believe that, but their bodies and their minds really don't believe that. So then we have this justification of things because society tells us it's okay. And these teachers and, different people, these gurus tell us it's okay, it's a good thing, but we're not looking at the facts of the science and the research and listening to the personal stories or looking at the damage things have in our life, because we want to be, it's not a big deal. We want to think that our negative actions aren't creating a big impact, and we don't think that our positive actions will create a big impact, when in reality, it doesn't matter. We just have to make better choices. We just have to be willing to go there, and it will ripple out in a bigger way, whether it's politically, whether it's looking at, other elements of our life. We just have to be willing to look at it all. That's my view of the collective evolution that we are really, truly in right now, and what our responsibility is.
I honor it, and I feel like people will use any excuse that they can to not feel guilt or shame, and so if they can get involved with a group or a certain, friends or whatever that empower them to keep using the porn or whatever it is, then they'll automatically follow that, because it's so much easier than making a change or diving deeper into that shadow of, wait a minute, why am I feeling this? And I do think that there's been a lot of guilt and shame and manipulation forced upon us. Guilt, shame, fear, grief, sadness, resentment are some of the lowest vibrational feelings. So our society has targeted that, whether it's through marketing or through politics or whatever it is they do. They totally manipulate our emotions. And one of the best ways you can become sovereign is to start really getting clear on who you are and what it is you're calling in and what it is that you want to do. And I did want to ask you a little bit, Holly. I have certainly lots of perspectives, but what are some of your favorite ways to empower yourself and others to start getting off of the autopilot and going into the somewhat uncomfortable to make some changes?
Yeah. I don't think that I can emphasize enough the value of unplugging from the mainstream anything. And most people are going to think that this sounds super radical, extreme, or whatever. But from my creativity, from my health, from my personal life, from my marriage, from just every single aspect of my life is negatively impacted when I am plugged into things like mindless entertainment and mainstream shows or TV. And I kind of grew up pretty unconventionally. So we didn't have a TV. I was homeschooled. I think I was kind of primed for that. But there's definitely been different times where I've, binge watched Netflix and I've gotten into certain shows, and every single time my mood depresses. I get these different internal feelings of kind of being untethered, ungrounded, unfocused. I find myself really critical of myself, my self-esteem goes down, my productivity and focus for sure go down. Basically, I feel like any time that I'm utilizing kind of mainstream, and this extends to social media too. This year I have done 2 straight months of being completely off social media, and a lot of little mini days and times. I'll delete the app for a couple days and just breathe and focus on me. I just think the value in unplugging from the bombardment of you're not good enough and think this way and here's what's normal and here's what's happening and here's what's to be afraid of. Again, whether you look at the whole coronavirus thing to just mainstream TV to just what we're looking at as entertainment. Is it really entertainment, or is it it's almost like just the shock value that shows and stuff have to continue to venture to? You're almost watching something and you're just being traumatized and shocked. You're oh my gosh, And so I think that the impact that has on our emotional health, on our spiritual health, on our physical health is just, again, I don't think it can be measured. And one of the number one things that when I work with people and they're in this state of fear and panic and just insane, overwhelming anxiety, especially right now, is I'm turn off the TV, delete social media, stop watching the news, because all of those things will convince you that the world is about to implode any moment. And it doesn't mean you have to bury your head in the sand and be, again, naive and ignorance is bliss. It just means you're choosing to be very intentional about the knowledge and the information you're processing and that you're looking at, and you are not just taking an assault rifle of fear and propaganda and narratives from the media and just blowing up your brain 24/7. And I think 2020 has made people do that more than ever. They've always been prone to do it. But 2020 being an election year, all the COVID stuff, people just have to unplug. They have to unplug and go sit outside and watch the birds and breathe and understand in that moment you always have a choice to connect to Mother Nature's okay right now. There is a place of okayness that we can access internally. And again, it doesn't mean that we're naive and that we're pretending nothing, I can't hear you, I can't see you, but we're powerless to make a change or be the change as long as all of our attention is hijacked by the media and the narratives and entertainment. We're either on high alert or we're being numbed out. And just like I think we have to make, the right choices for wholesome, nutritious food, I think we have to do that with our brains and our minds now more than ever. And that is like unplugging from that mainstream, the visuals, the news, the entertainment, all of that.
I agree. And it's easier said than done often, and it takes a lot of actual conscious work in order to do that and to make that decision or make that change. I always love following Mel Robbins. She's a motivation coach. Are you familiar with her?
I am, yeah.
Yeah, she always, this has been around a long time, but she always gives credit to like the 5-second rule where your vessel actually has to really follow the impulse that you get within your brain in order to make a change. Everybody's always waiting around until they feel like it, Well, Mel always makes a nice point to say you're never going to feel like it because it's true. You have to get that impulse within your brain and then choose to act on it and allow the life force and the motivation within your body to then pair with it. And the simplest thing is actually, deleting your Facebook on your cell phone or turning off the TV. Like, easier said than done. But if you take a breath and you consciously act on that first impulse, then before you know it, you've already turned it off. You're 10 minutes down the road and life's in a whole different perspective than it was when you had that TV on.
Exactly. And people who have spent their whole lives kind of self-medicating with entertainment and, TVs, movies, and video games were more prominent when we were growing up, but now it's in our pockets. It's not just at home or on the weekends. It's 24/7. We're at a stoplight. We're scrolling. Our brains were not meant to take that level of information, especially when it's stressful information. It's not like we're looking at puppies all day. Like, it's fear and anxiety and murder and violence and the world is burning and all of this stuff. It can become so consuming and overwhelming that we become paralyzed. And like I said at the beginning, cultivating and tapping into my inner strength and resilience, that's happened because I have been more willing in 2020 than ever to disconnect from that stuff in bigger ways. Again, I've kind of always kept it really at an arm's length. It's never been an issue for me. I mean, I've had other things I've struggled with bigger than entertainment, but I've just pushed it further and further away because I'm like, I don't even want this to touch my peace of mind. It's too precious. It's too important. And I have gotten put up more and more firm boundaries on what I'll allow in. And I think we have to do that. Even, I get the need to disconnect and block people or unfriend or whatever. You should never have people that are really toxic in your life. So if you need to, if you really need to delete people that are really causing you stress or whatever, or, cut people out of your life, like, be willing to do that. If it's really about your peace and your well-being, then you have to be willing to do that. So I think it's super important. I think if everyone listening to this right now just decided to delete their social media apps for like 48 hours, I guarantee you they will be in a completely different headspace, completely different. They'll be like, oh, wow, okay. They think that it's inescapable, but it's not. It's just being fed by their devices.
Absolutely. And like you said, a constant state of triggering because so much of it is judgments, from one another and tuning in to whether or not that's causing you to feel guilt or shame or trauma, and just little things. Even like I said, if I would share something on Facebook and I was like, oh, well, this might be a little controversial, I'd have to breathe into that and then be a little bit brave and say, you know what, it's okay. It's okay to share this. And then whatever happens, happens. And I do agree. Some people definitely need to sift out the friends and not show up for abuse or attack. But I also, on the other side, I often invite my clients to say, you know what? Well, yeah, that family member is really annoying you with their political beliefs, but like, what are the good things this family member has done from you, you know? And that people will start to talk, oh, well, every year at Christmas we do this and that. And I'm like, you know, it's not that you hate this person. It's just that you're not enjoying that perspective right now. So what if you breathe into it a little, see if you can see it from their side. If you can't, then just, you know, keep a healthy boundary with it. The most compassionate people in the world have the firmest boundaries. And it doesn't mean that you don't care or that you're not interested. It just means that you want to be really conscious of what energies you're allowing yourself and your own vessel to feel at that time, because it really does make a huge, huge difference in the world and how it turns.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think people tend to take extremes for everything, and the whole, like, that's my boundary is kind of a cop-out for I'm not willing to tolerate anything that doesn't, you know, 100% back up my beliefs. So we definitely have to, like, sink into that, like you said, like, pause and be like, okay, yeah, this may be uncomfortable or whatever. There's a fine line between abuse and toxicity and just a differences of opinion. And I think that there's, like everything, the pendulum tends to swing to that opposite side. And now we've got these people kind of like, they're putting boundaries everywhere, like boundaries where they need to just be moving into growth and expansion. And they're like, no, that person said that and I don't like it. So they're just like cutting off and deleting and blocking, you know, in droves. I personally, when I find myself in that trigger moment where I'm like, oh, I see something that I don't agree with, if it's repetitive and redundant, then I look at it like the entertainment. I'm like, okay, this person is consistently posting things that really don't align with my beliefs, and I'm uncomfortable being connected. Like, it takes a lot to get to that point. Most of the time, it's just something that triggers me. I try to evaluate what that is, and I try to understand where they're coming from. I'm like, I look at people like a collection of ingredients, and each person has their own ingredients that resulted in their way of thinking, you know? And I'm like, okay, they're doing the best they can with their ingredients. You can't expect to take the ingredients for a meatloaf and bake a cake. So when you kind of like almost dehumanize it that way a little bit, it's not as serious. You're like, okay, that person had those ingredients and that's the conclusion they came up with, and just allow them to be. You don't feel this need to react or attack or, you know, even necessarily block. You're just like, okay, that's their perspective and they're allowed to have it.
And I don't have to take it personally, and I don't have to feel feelings, you know, associated with it. I can just hold space.
Exactly, and we don't have to go block every single person who doesn't agree with us. Actually, in times, I will purposely leave people on my friends list sometimes that I want to disconnect with, because I'm like, let me see if, you know, a month from now, if I'm still bothered by this person, let me see if I can work through what they're maybe triggering in me. You know, I use it as a challenge. Like, our triggers are always our kind of leading us to growth and expansion personally. So, yeah, I just think we got to use discernment. And I think when we disconnect and we're constantly regrounding and tethering ourselves, we don't react to those things. When we are in a state of, again, that just all-out assault on our mind 24/7, everything feels like an attack and a threat. Somebody says they like purple and you like pink, and you're like, you just can't handle it. So we got to work on that. We got to work on our ability to handle that while still saying, okay, I'll use a boundary when I really need to. I'll disconnect when I really need to. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep growing and accepting and getting better as a person, because it's about me as much as it is anybody else.
Absolutely. You know, and there is such reward in uncomfort sometimes and growth. And like Holly said, big difference between, you know, someone abusing you and then also just sitting and seeing what rises within you, because I believe that is where the alchemy lies and where the transmutation of these energies lie. And I'm the same way. I've done that before too, where I'm like, maybe I'll get rid of this person. And I'm like, no, let me keep it around and see, like, what is my feeling or attachment to this, and why would I have to get rid of them completely? And so, I love looking into that as well. But our show is flying right through, and we only have about a minute and a half left. So, Holly, I was wondering if you would just share your information with our listeners one more time.
Yeah, so I'm Spiritual Fit Chick on Twitter, Instagram, my website, spiritualfitchick.com. You can access my coaching, all of my companies, and all the different things that I am up to in this world from the website. And pretty much find me anywhere through Spiritual Fit Chick.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming and sharing your perspectives and your heart and your energy with us. You know, these aren't the most easy conversations, but it's so important that we do talk about it and we start to transmute and create change and really start to ground in this collective vision that so many people want to see come to Earth right now. So thank you for taking the time and joining us today, Holly.
Yes, thank you.
And thanks to our listeners for following us here on Heart Over Ego Radio. You can find us on all major podcast apps. Simply search Heart Over Ego Radio. Like us, follow us, subscribe to us. We have all kinds of different shows and services that are attached to those. This is Creating Heaven on Earth, ascending from the 3D to the 5D. Thank you so much for tuning in and holding space with us. Bye-bye.